When commentators talk about bubbles, about irrational exuberance, frenzied speculation, one historical episode is invoked more than any other. Tulip mania. The Dutch tulip bubble of the 1630s has become shorthand for collective madness. The idea that people, gripped by greed, once paid the price of a house for a single flower bulb. But as with so many popular legends, the truth is more interesting, and, as I have argued in my own scholarly work, far more revealing about institutions and incentives than about mass hysteria. To understand tulip mania, we must first understand the world in which it unfolded. The Netherlands of the early 17th century was one born of rebellion. After nearly 80 years of struggle, the Dutch provinces had achieved de facto independence from Habsburg Spain. They had fought for self-rule, for religious freedom, and for control of their own trade. By the 1620s and 1630s, even as the 30 Years' War raged across much of Central Europe, the Dutch Republic was entering its golden age. Amsterdam was becoming the world's financial hub. Dutch merchants controlled far-flung commercial empires stretching from Indonesia to Brazil. The Bank of Amsterdam, founded in 1609, introduced one of the world's first stable, reliable banking currencies of the modern period, and joint stock companies such as the Dutch East India Company and the Dutch West India Company pioneered modern shareholding. The Dutch economy was booming. Trade, finance, and art, this was the age of Rembrandt, all flourished, and amid this prosperity, one foreign import found especially fertile soil, the tulip. Tulips were not native to Europe. They arrived from the Ottoman Empire, from what is now Turkey, in the late 16th century. Ambassadors to the Sultan brought bulbs back to Vienna, Paris, and finally the Netherlands. They were unlike any flower Europeans had ever seen. Bold, symmetrical, and vividly colored, the tulip soon became a luxury good. It was used to adorn dresses and perfume. By the early 1600s, cultivating tulips had become a fashion among the well-to-do, much as collecting rare wines or art might be today. Certain varieties, especially those with striking color variations, such as streaks and flares, were prized above all others. These were so-called broken bulbs. And while they weren't sure how these came about, they knew that the bulbs of these tulips would pass on their interesting characteristics to their offspring. We know now that they were caused by the infection of a mosaic virus that altered the pigmentation distribution within the petals. By the 1630s, the demand for these exotic flowers had vastly outpaced their supply. They took 7 to 12 years to propagate. A single bulb could produce offsets, but only slowly, a product of the mosaic virus, which caused them to be smaller and to grow slower. The combination of rarity, fashion, and uncertainty created an era of exclusivity and of speculation. Not without reason. The prices for certain rare bulbs, like the Semper Augustus, pictured on the left, and of the Viceroy, pictured all the way on the right, recorded prices reaching into the thousands of Dutch guilders, enough to buy a nice house and lots of nice things to put in it in the 17th century. Initially, tulips were bought and sold much like any other luxury commodity, privately among connoisseurs and wealthy patrons. But as prices rose, more and more people sought to participate merchants, artisans, even farmers. Tulip dealers began meeting in taverns, coffee houses, and guild halls, forming what were known as colleges, informal markets where bulbs were traded. By 1635 and 1636, tulip trading had evolved into a kind of futures market. Bulbs, planted in the autumn and lifted only in the summer, could not easily change hands during most of the year. And to keep trading going, buyers and sellers entered into contracts for future delivery, promising to exchange a bulb months later for a set price. Crucially for our story, these contracts were unenforceable in court. This was because agreeing to sell something at a predetermined price you didn't actually own yet was not legal and thought to be akin to gambling. The contracts, therefore, were more like gentlemen's agreements than legal obligations. Typically, a small deposit, perhaps 2% of the price, was required as a down payment. If prices rose, the buyer could sell the contract on to someone else at a profit, and if prices fell, he could simply walk away, forfeiting the deposit. This institutional design Unenforceable contracts with minimum margin requirements created the perfect conditions for speculative excess. And in the winter of 1636 to 1637, a frenzy took hold, particularly for common tulip bulbs. Records show contracts changing hands several times a day, trading on paper among middle-class participants who never intended to take delivery. A buyer might agree to purchase a lot of bulbs for 100 guilders in February, sell the same contract for 200 in March, and so on, without ever seeing a flower. And seen in this light, what was happening was less an irrational mania, so much as rational gambling within a poorly designed marketplace. Participants faced little downside. The small deposit capped their losses, while rising prices offered potentially unlimited gains. The market structure encouraged turnover, not ownership. There was also a lot of drinking involved, taking place as these sales did in taverns and coffee houses. By late 1636, prices for common tulip bulbs had multiplied severalfold in a very brief amount of time. Newspapers and pamphlets marveled at the frenzy. It seemed as if everyone was trading in tulips and making a paper fortune. And then, almost overnight, it ended. In February of 1637, buyers began refusing to honor contracts. Perhaps a few failed sales triggered a loss of confidence. Perhaps the approach of spring reminded traders that real delivery would soon be due. And the steep rise in price had given traders pause. Hundreds of guilders for common tulip bulbs was no small matter. Whatever the cause, within days prices for most tulips collapsed to a fraction of their prior levels. The same taverns that had been filled so recently with laughter and speculation were now filled with recrimination. Buyers who had put down deposits simply walked away, and sellers who had expected payment found themselves holding worthless promises. In the popular imagination, fueled later by moralizing writers penning tracts long after the fact, all became a cautionary tale of greed, folly, and disaster. Most famously, Charles Mackay's Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds, which was widely read in the 19th century, depicted barbers, sailors, and chimney sweeps trading fortunes for flowers, and the entire nation ruined by folly. In reality, however, the economic damage was minimal. There was little leverage and contracts were unenforceable, so few people actually lost any serious amounts of money, and there was no chain reaction to financial institutions writ large. The sums tied up in tulip speculations resulted in a minute fraction of Dutch wealth. No banks failed, no trade routes closed. By spring of 1637, commerce in Amsterdam continued as before. The Dutch Republic's economy, anchored in shipping, finance, and industry, rolled on, scarcely noticing the supposed crash, which saw tulip prices return essentially to what they had been in the fall of the previous year, and to continue their long-term upward trend. Indeed, tulip cultivation continued. The Dutch remained the leading horticulturalists, and prices for rare bulbs continued to trade for thousands of guilders for a long time after, and the flower remained a cultural icon. So why does everyone from television pundits to Federal Reserve officials reach for the tulip analogy whenever asset prices rise? I think it's because it's a simple story, and simplicity sells. It's far easier to warn of Tulip Mania 2.0 than to analyze the complex interplay of credit, contracts, and incentives. As should be clear to you by now, the Tulip episode shares very little in common with modern financial markets or modern financial bubbles. There was no central bank backstop, no systemic leverage, no interbank contagion, no legally binding contracts, no gargantuan sums involved, and no impact on the overall economy. The story of Tulip Mania, properly understood, is not about madness, it's about markets. It teaches us that financial manias often emerge from the interaction between human incentives and institutional design. The Dutch tulip market's unenforceable contracts, minimal deposits, and speculative culture created a self-contained bubble and burst with little harm. Far from a disaster, it was a passing curiosity, one quickly absorbed by a vibrant and growing economy. And that, perhaps, is the final irony. The episode that has come to symbolize economic ruin was, in truth, a footnote to one of history's greatest commercial booms. Still, Tulip Mania continues to be one of my favorite stories in the history of financial markets, and I hope now it becomes one of yours, too.